right now. So you're all good.
All right. Well, good morning and welcome to my session called The Untruthful Art. And I'm happy that you chose to come to this session. I mean, the sheer number of amazing speakers at any event is staggering, and the number of amazing speakers at this event, and especially at this slot, is even more. This is an important topic, and well, it's not designed to make people uncomfortable or upset, but it has been known to do exactly that. So again, that's not my point. That's not what I'm trying to achieve. But be aware that there is some contention about what I'm about to show you. One of the best known authors in this space of data visualization is Alberto Cairo. He's a professor in Florida. And the title of this session is a nod to his book, The Truthful Art, that deals with all things data visualization. Imagine my face when he reached out on Twitter and told me that he liked the title of this session. Kind of a fanboy moment, but yeah. So let's go straight in. We live in the age of information. In 2020 alone, there was estimated to be about 40 trillion gigabytes of data. That's 40 zettabytes. And I pretty much suspect that half of that is porn and spam, and the rest is evenly split between selfies, cat pictures, and maybe somewhat useful information. But how much is true? How much of it is true? Well, what is truth anyway? I wish there was a simple answer to that, but the world is simply too complex. And in this world of complexity, there are always ways to leverage this information overload to influence opinion, to push an agenda, and to change outcomes. The only thing worse than getting played is getting played without realizing it. The agenda for today is, and something that you need to remember is that people are predominantly visual. And that's why we're going to be looking at what makes visuals so dangerous. And while we're at it, we're going to see what deception looks like. Some of these things are going to blow your mind. And as we go along, I'm going to point out how to spot potential foul play, because at the end of the day, nothing that I say here will make any difference unless you learn how to approach information in another way. My goal today is to show you the central tenet of visual trickery. Ourselves, we literally see what we want to see. By creating a plausible narrative, we can mislead almost anyone. And that is all it takes. My name is Alexander. I have 23 years, 24 years in IT, pretty much all of it spent with data, databases, and infrastructure in some way, shape, or form. I live in Sweden, and I work for a company called Solution Experts as a principal solutions architect, which, by the way, is the best title I've ever had because nobody knows what I do. The thing is, that's pretty easy to explain. I make data matter because only data that matters, well, it can change anything. I do this by going all over the world to speak at conferences, or I should say I used to do this by going all over the world speaking at conferences and training and that kind of stuff. Since the world ended in March, I've been stuck in my home office, just pretty much like everybody else. I am one of 7 data platform MVPs, Microsoft MVPs in Sweden. I co-host a podcast called Knee Deep in Tech. And yes, for those of you who are in my age, that is the Doom game logo. Works every time. All right, we're going to go through 5 ways of misrepresenting data. We are now going in for the first one. This is Greta. Greta is angry. Very, very angry. Because she thinks that the environment is going to shit, and she would like people and governments to do something about it. But is the environment going to shit? Not everyone agrees. So let's look at the data, shall we? Let's start with this one. This was put on Twitter by the National Review, a conservative news outlet out of the US. The data is in Fahrenheit, but the pattern is pretty clear. And as the tweet says, this is the only climate change chart you'll ever need to see. Mic drop. Or is it? Well, this is a great starting point for visual trickery, because I told you that people see what they want to see. The people that don't want to acknowledge any climate change look at this and go, huh, well, that's what I thought, and go about their day. The problem lies in the way that the data is presented. The y-axis is scaled in such a way that any subtle change is going to be nigh on invisible. That is the whole point. So if we are to dive into the data, because looking at the data around 57 degrees Fahrenheit or 13.7 degrees centigrade, we can start to see a trend. And what's even more interesting is that the absolute numbers that I have here, they don't really tell us much because it's averaged over the entire planet. And anyone who's ever been traveling anywhere, there's kind of a difference between different parts of our planet. So this brings the number of naughty tricks up to 2. But we are not done yet. Because if you look at what's really interesting, and that would be the anomaly, i.e. the actual change over time, then we can see that, oh yeah, things are indeed going to shit. I know why Greta is angry. The ocean temperature is rapidly warming. And I'd go ahead and say that Greta is probably right to be pretty angry. All right. Let me show you another example. Everything around the numbers on a chart like this is referred to as the scaffolding. That would be the axes, the units, and such. So let's look at another way of using axes, in this case, to our advantage. Let's say that we have a super hot web shop selling the latest in cat fashion. One of the key metrics is the conversion rate, and the conversion rate is the number of visitors to the website that then turned into a sale. We've been asked to present these numbers to management, and this is what we came up with. April was a phenomenal month. Just, wow, look at this. The curve for this web shop is just taking off. Yeah, well, while we're at it, take a look at the y-axis. Something's wrong with the y-axis, because if we're forcing the baseline or the 0 to 6%, well, everything becomes relative to that number. So suddenly a difference of 0.7% looks like we basically own the world. Now, axis manipulation is all controlled by setting the starting number of the y-axis to something that furthers our goal. It's easily done in Excel, it's easily done in Power BI. Most often, auto is the right setting. Not always, but most often. And in this case, an auto would have led to 0, and thus we'd had a pretty reasonable comparison. April is still a better month, but it's not this stellar month. When you really, really want examples of ways to screw with both axes at the same time, I cannot recommend Fox News high enough. They remain an inexhaustible source of wonky graphics. Let's look at this graph that apparently depicts job loss by quarter. There are a few interesting things to note, such as what is not there. For starters, dude, where is my y-axis? Why did someone take it away? Hold that thought, it'll become clear in a second. And while we're at it, there is something wrong with the x-axis as well. You see, the points are not equidistant. And equidistant in this case means that they're not spaced as they should have been. I mean, the distance between December of 07 and September 08 is not the same as September 08 to March 09 or 10. Okay. This makes the line itself highly suspicious. I mean, or I should say highly suspect. It is very straight. Let's go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data behind this. So if I use the arbitrarily picked axis points, well, I can create this line. The problem is it is not in any way, shape, or form showing the actual truth. So let's start by moving things around. So we put the y-axis or the points where they should be. Suddenly the graph looks like this. Okay, it is not a straight line. But again, I am just looking at 4 points. There is a heck of a lot more data behind this. So if we just bring the whole shebang in, suddenly it looks like this. And I don't know about you, but this is not the curve that Fox News showed. In fact, it is nowhere near the curve that Fox News showed. While we're at it, my final contender in the axis manipulation category is this one. I'm just going to point out the issue to you. Look there. The x-axis suddenly turned logarithmic. Why would you do that? I mean, come on. Why? This was taken out of the World Inequity Report of 2017. This is not something that someone just whipped up for a web page. This is an actual published report. And it's going to get worse. So, always look at the scaffolding. The scaffolding is going to show you what might be going on. And while we're at the scaffolding, the bar chart axis should always include 0. And if it doesn't, definitely make sure that you write out why. There's a reason. And of course, you should never change scales midstream. Just no. Bad graph, bad Fox News, bad anyone. So let's go into the second part, which is cherry picking. Cherry picking is the art of choosing the data that fits your narrative. If it's done in science, it's called p-hacking, or p for statistical probability of something being accurate. In the rest of the world, it is generally called shenanigans, but people rarely consider it. So let's start with this. And I'm assuming that everybody knows Star Wars. I might be a bit of a Star Wars fan, like a lot of Star Wars fan. So the evil empire, and there is this guy called Darth Vader. He has an interesting take on leadership. Let's just say that. Put simply, by choosing the people that I ask, i.e., I'm cherry picking the people that I ask, and frame the question in a way that I'm influencing the response, I can get exactly the result I'm looking for. There is not a stormtrooper in the world that would say that Darth Vader is not a good leader, because it kind of has some impact on, well, your breathing, really. But let's look at another example. I come from Sweden, the second most dangerous country in Europe, according to the site numbeo.com. That's interesting. I've been here for 42 years. By filtering on the crime index by country in 2020, Sweden sticks out like a sore thumb. I mean, we're up here. We have the Ukraine above us, which is reasonable. And then we have France, Ireland, Moldova, Italy, and so on and so on. We're on second place, which is not a good thing. The trouble is, this data is self-reported. So first, not only do you need to find the site, you need to put in your opinion of safety, i.e., the underlying data is not worth an iota. This, however, does not stop the Swedish racist party from using this in the public debate to try to curb immigration. So let's look again at the actual numbers. I dove into the Swedish Crime Prevention Council data to look at violent crime over time. Okay, so we can see that while the number of reported crimes is steadily going up, the number of deaths from uh, violent crime has stayed fairly constant. The rumors of Sweden's notorious no-go zones and rampant violent crime are not backed by the numbers. Does that mean everything is fine? Oh, no, 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 no. Absolutely not. But it's nowhere near as bad as some would like us to think. This data can polarize people, and it does. But again, the data does not show what people say it is showing. Let's turn our eyes to the UK. And I was kind of, I wouldn't say concerned, but kind of a bit scared when I was accepted to NDC London, because a lot of the data that I'm going to show you is based off UK data. But let's look at the UK. I mean, due to Brexit, it is on everybody's lips. The site economicshelp.org ran an article about cherry-picking data and came up with this great example to show that the UK national debt is absolutely skyrocketing. I mean, just look at it. The debt has tripled since 2002. What is happening? Well, let me start by looking at the x-axis, our old friend, the x-axis again. I'm fairly sure that there might be more data behind this, because I know for a fact that there were a few years before 1995, and rumor has it the world did not completely stop and end at 2016. We're now at 2021, so what happened with the data between? Well, you know what I like to do. Let's go dig it out, shall we? Funnily enough, according to the UK public spending website, this is a more accurate portrayal of the UK national debt as a percent of the gross domestic product. And I mean, to paraphrase the TV series Chernobyl, not great, not terrible. I mean, in fact, it is going down if you look at it over time. And time is very, very important whenever we look at time series data. It kind of goes with the territory, time series data. It's definitely going up. I mean, in the short term, but it has been going down for quite some time. And sure, during the war, the UK had other issues when it comes to financial stuff, but there we have it. Data does not say what the people think it does. So this drives me to my point for this part, and that is always look for the agenda. I go absolutely batshit crazy when people say, let the data speak for itself. It doesn't. The data will never say squat that the person showing the data is not trying to show you. And while we're at it, consider the responders. If you were to ask Hispanic males between the age of 40 and 55 in a very specific part of, I don't know, rural Utah, you're going to have a vastly different answer or data set than if you ask women in their 20s in Senegal. I guarantee you. So you need to not only look at the agenda, you need to look at the respondents, because they will definitely influence the response you're getting. And of course, if you can, always go and look at the base data. Because again, look at the first one, there's always an agenda. Someone is always trying to influence you in some way. Some things you're more than happy to be influenced to, and some you're not. So let's dive into the third part. That is comparisons. And comparing things is a very classical way of driving a narrative. There's a saying that one must compare apples to apples, but I'll show you some pretty creative ways to compare apples to trombones. And the trombone pictured is a military 6-valve trombone from 1866, in case anyone's wondering about it. Let's again return to the relative danger of living. Let's look at a visual that plots the most dangerous cities in the US. This small infographic over there shows the relative danger, and we can see that Detroit is about half as dangerous as Chicago. Whatever that means. I mean, how is something half as dangerous. If I saw this on a website or in a newspaper, I might go, huh, yeah, well, I've heard Chicago's horrible, and stay there. I've been reinforced in my preconceptions. But what do the numbers really say here? Well, let's simplify the visual a bit, because this is what's called fluff. There's a lot of information in this picture, all designed to take away your eyes and your mind from the glaring issues that is present in this visual. So let's take this and just make it into a normal bar chart. We have now removed the fluff. Again, the fluff is just there to make it that much more difficult to really look at the numbers. So the first thing that sticks out is the absolute and complete lack of an x-axis. Wah, wah, wah. Danger, Will Robinson, danger. Why is that? Funny that. Let's add in the x-axis, shall we? Okay. So now we have the absolute numbers of homicides in 2019 by city. We can see that Chicago is on top. Baltimore is not a funny place either, or neither is Detroit or Dallas or St. Louis. Now, the problem here is that these are absolute numbers. And trust me, I am not that good at geography, but even I know that there is a slight difference in sizes between Chicago and Baltimore. Like, pretty big. I mean, Baltimore has about 25% of the population of Chicago. So instead of doing absolute numbers, we need to figure out a way to compare these, again, apples to apples, and control for the number of people. So by simply dividing the number of homicides per 100,000 residents, suddenly things start to look different. And yes, we can see that Baltimore is still up there, but Chicago has dropped significantly. So again, compare apples to apples. There should be no trombones in your comparisons. In fact, make sure that your comparisons are trombone-free. Unfortunately, none other than the BBC did not get that memo. This is an actual example. This was put on Twitter 1.5 or 2 weeks ago. This is the BBC. The BBC is now comparing the COVID hospital patients between the different parts of the United Kingdom. And as you can see, Wales and Northern Ireland, well, something is going on in Northern Ireland for sure. I mean, they have more cases than Wales. No, they don't. Because the axes are different. You cannot compare these until you change the y-axis. Because as it stands, sorry, you can't compare. It is only designed to project an image that is not backed by the numbers. I think, and this is my idea, I think the point is to show that COVID-19 cases is on the rise. Fine, but the visuals are simply crap. Which kind of brings me to comparisons in a single graph, single chart. Because comparing things implies that they are related, even when they're not. I mean, what can you really tell from this visual? I have two different x-axes, one over here and one over there, or the y-axis, sorry about that. I'm pretty sure that the unemployment and the GDP change, well, it's related in some way, shape, or form, but it's not obviously related. So there is no point in having them in the same graph. In fact, separate them. Put them into two graphs, and then we can have a conversation about what the data is really showing. Finally, let's look at revenue. And as we can clearly see from this visual, the revenue is going up, 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 and keep going up. We can expect some hefty bonuses this year. Yeah. Look at the y-axis. Unless this is Microsoft or some other huge company, we might have a bit of an issue. Because this is cumulative revenue, meaning we're adding to the revenue as we go. Unfortunately, if we don't do that, but we actually plot this absolute numbers over time, suddenly it looks like this. And yeah, the direction of my bonus is shown on this graph. I've seen this more than once. You can hide a lot of things underneath a cumulative graph. So what can we say about this? Well, compare apples to apples. Make sure that there are 0 trombones in your comparisons. And while we're at it, compare to what? I am the best speaker in history. Compared to my cat. It's a correct comparison, but it has no bearing on reality. So make sure that you compare to something that really matters. And of course, always consider absolute versus cumulative increases. We're now going into the fourth part, and the fourth and the fifth part are slightly more serious, and this is where my blood pressure is starting to spike. Let's start with correlating causation, and causation is a difficult word for anyone, especially not a non-native speaker. So a causation is the action of causing something, and the causality is the relationship between cause and effect. Okay. I'll tell you a story. Glyphosate, more known as Roundup, was it's a weed killer, and it was brought to market by the Monsanto Corporation in 1974. Since then, there have been all kinds of creative ways to market it. For instance, in 1996, the Attorney General of New York ordered Monsanto to pull ads that said that Roundup was safer than table salt and practically non-toxic to mammals, birds, and fish. The debate about Roundup being carcinogenic or not is still very much alive today, and it has been several lawsuits that has granted huge sums in damages to people claiming that Roundup was the cause for their cancer. I can't speak to the validity of these claims, especially as there are vastly different opinions on the matter. I mean, in March 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer, they classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic in humans. In contrast, the European Food Safety Authority concluded in November the same year, 2015, that the substance is unlikely to pose a carcinogenic threat to humans. Okay. But the lack of firm evidence to support either claim has not kept people from creating very, very curious correlations. And while we're at it, why don't we throw genetically modified crops under the bus as we go? The main point of including this graph here is to make note of what is going on with the axes. The axis on the left, corresponding to the bar chart, does not go to 0. We've already noted why this is problematic, but it gets worse because both the scale and the intercept, i.e. where the two lines intercept, they've been adjusted. So the red curve traces the peaks of the yellow bars. And in order to do this, the axis has to go all the way to negative 10% GE corn planted in negative 10,000 tons glyphosate used. There is no way you can do that. But it didn't stop anyone from fixing this graph and making it look like it should be. I mean, we've noted that y-axis need to go to 0. Well, not necessarily to 0, but it goes to a negative value for a quantity, in this case, percentage or tonnage. That's not going to work, and it's definitely something that should set off alarm bells. The paper that this came from has even more very, very difficult graphs. 1998, a British physician named Andrew Wakefield published a study linking the MMR vaccine to autism. That study has been thoroughly torn to shreds. It was redacted from the Lancet. It was, Andrew Wakefield was struck from the medical register in the UK for spreading utter and complete bull crap. But not before the anti-vaccine movement got pretty serious wind in their sails. As people are getting diagnosed with this condition every day, others take the opportunity to try to sow distrust and push an agenda, linking most likely completely innocent things together. Like this. In this case, there are no clear issues with the scaffolding. The axes seem fine. The correlation is definitely there. But what is not there is causation. It correlates, but there is no causation. The only thing, let me say that again, the only thing we can conclude from this visual is that the number of individuals diagnosed with autism is going up, as is the sale of organic food. That's it. Full stop. Period. But remember that people see what they want to see. Consider parents pushed to the absolute breaking point, trying to care for a severely autistic child, trying to find anything to explain why their beloved child has unfairly been struck with a condition that completely changes everything. It is not hard to see how easy it would be to give said parents a target to anchor their emotions and fight against. There's a guy called Tyler Vigen. He runs a website called Spurious Correlation. It is absolutely hilarious. We can see these amazing gems like the per capita consumption of cheese and total revenue of generated by golf courses this year really correlate. Now, I can bet a fairly substantial sum of money that they do not, there's no causation. Correlation does not mean causation. Otherwise, I have a lot of cheese to sell you. And this is also a favorite of mine, because in January 2005, Bobby Henderson, a then 24-year-old Oregon State University physics graduate, he sent an open letter regarding the flying spaghetti monster to the Kansas State Board of Education. In this letter, he founded the Pastafarian religion as a satire on creationism, and he presented the argument that global warming, earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural disasters are a direct effect of the shrinking number of pirates since the 1800s. Pirates are a key part of Pastafarianism. I'd say that Mr. Henderson has elevated axis manipulation to an art form. There is absolutely nothing right with this graph, and I absolutely love it. Since I also love correlation that has no basis in reality, I need to show this too. It turns out that the per capita consumption of chicken correlates fairly well to the total U.S. crude oil imports. And I can guarantee you they have nothing with each other to do. Kind of fun though. So just because you can does not mean you should at all. Scale will decide the curve on anything you do. I mean, if I change the scale, my curve will take on a different look, as we saw with the organic food stuff. And if there is nothing else that you bring home after this session, is that correlation does not equal causation. Say after me, correlation does not equal causation. But this is one of the absolutely foremost errors that people make, errors of thought that people make. It's so easy, but don't do it. Okay, let's go in for the fifth and final part. And this is where it no longer gets funny. Well, it starts funny, but it stops being funny pretty quickly. Because the Indian Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJT for short, and I'm terribly sorry that I probably butchered the name of them. They have a pretty clear agenda because they're a political party. That agenda is to make sure that Narendra Modi stays the Prime Minister of India. And like many other political parties all over the world, they've been playing fairly fast and loose with numbers. as this picture that the BGP put up on Twitter a few years back shows. Yeah, this is a screenshot from Twitter. There are several things wrong with this image, but let's start with the most fundamental question. What is this graphic trying to say? In this case, what it is implying does in no way gel with the numbers we can see with our own eyes. But not one to be deterred by mere facts, the party decided to get creative on the design of the graphic to make it seem as if the petroleum prices in India was going up. No, sorry, going down when they were going up. So this is another example of the fluff that I showed you earlier. And let's clean this visual up a bit, because there's a lot of stuff going on that is trying to grab our attention. So by cleaning the arrows, I've removed the arrows, and already the mind is definitely starting to get confused. I was never very good at math, and my friends can attest to that, but the numbers don't add up to what we're expecting to see. 71 is generally viewed as less than 80. But yeah, so if we were to take away the bars at all, well, suddenly the data says something completely different than from what we had in the first place. So if we use this knowledge and then we go back to the beginning, well, suddenly this is what we should have seen. This is a clear example of an attempt to mislead with a visual. At first glance, it is absolutely hilarious, as the numbers are there on the visual for anyone to see. Come on. Unfortunately, the numbers are there for anyone to see, but still very few do. This is a very clear and very overt way of messing with data. It is basically expecting the viewer to be too dumb or too disinterested to see what's going on. That is not always the case. Quite often, we're going to see way more devious ways of screwing with the data. So, another example of driving an agenda is any US election. I'm not going to touch the 2020 election with a 10-foot pole. I'm just not going to do that. But I might as well go for any election. I'm going to go for the 2012 election, 2012 US election. Because it is now time to look at the issue, the inherent issue of maps. In 2012, the incumbent Democratic President Barack Obama was challenged by the Republican candidate Mitt Romney. And the counties that voted Republican are filled with red, and the counties that voted Democrat are filled in blue. Now, we know that 2012 saw the re-election of Democrat Barack Obama ahead of the Republican Mitt Romney. But looking at the map, isn't it obvious that the Republicans should have won? Isn't it apparent that the system is completely broken and that the Republicans had their election taken away from them? That was indeed the narrative following the 2012 election and the 2016 election and the 2020 election. Well, not necessarily 2016. That's a whole different story. Using this map, you can make a fairly compelling argument that this indeed was the case. So what's going on here? Well, I chose to tell you a story with a few distinct nudges to get you to think in the direction that I want you to think. One could argue that this is another kind of cherry picking, but this is cherry picking taken one step further. This is what I call purposeful bias, or as a friend called it, lying through your teeth. And that is the thing. I haven't lied. I haven't stated a single thing that is not entirely true. I didn't say that the Republicans won. I said that they obviously should have won from looking at this map. You filled in the rest. imagine what people do when reading the paper in the morning. The problem here is that the map does not take into account the number of voters per state. I mean, in Utah, for instance, there are probably about 30 people and several million cattle. While in California, the numbers are probably going to be reversed. Now, I know there's a lot of cattle in California as well, but you kind of see my point. It turns out that land does not vote. People do. And people are not evenly distributed over the entire country. So if we, instead of doing this, which is a perfect example of showing exactly what I've been talking about, if we were to do this, we're looking at the actual number of voters per state. The numbers become, shall we say, rather different. Suddenly, California and Florida, in this case, both voting Democrats, they add up to a serious number of votes. In fact, if we tally the votes, it turns out that the number of Democratic votes was almost 4 million, higher than the Republican, 60.6 versus 64.2 Democrat. Then we have the whole mess of electoral votes that confuses everything more, and let's leave this kind of democracy for now, because this is bound to make your head spin. Let's go to Florida. And I highly suggest anyone standing up, sitting down. I want to show you something very, very sinister, because in 2005, the US state of Florida enacted the so-called Stand Your Ground law, establishing the right by which a person may defend oneself or others against threats or perceived threats, even to the point of applying lethal force, regardless, this one is pretty important, regardless of whether safely retreating from the situation might have been possible in the first place. The idea was that this law would decrease gun-related deaths due to a victim being entirely in the right to pull a gun and use lethal force on a perceived threat, i.e. this law will make people think twice before, for instance, robbing someone in the street or break into their house. This graph was run by Reuters, not a small, teeny tiny third world news outlet, Reuters, in 2014, depicting the change in gun violence following the 2005 law. I'm going to point out the kind of issue here. Remember, I was never good at math, but even I can tell that there is something funky going on here. 873 is most often more than 721. And how the heck do we get there? Well, look at the axis. They flipped it upside down. So this is what it should look like. And it kind of paints a wholly different picture. I haven't been able to verify the claim, but what I've read is that the person behind this visual wanted to make it look like blood was flowing down. I don't buy that for a second. This is pure and unadulterated crap. Reuters. I said fairly early in the pandemic that I would never touch COVID data with a stick because, let's face it, the COVID data is just too scattered. We don't know anything about it. And especially being from Sweden, well, people have a lot of opinions on the Swedish approach to the COVID-19 crisis. But this came by me on Twitter about a month ago. And I decided right then and there, I need to bring this into this session because it definitely shows my point. So every week, the UK government publishes a report. It's called the Weekly COVID-19 Surveillance Report. And this has been going on for the entire year of 2020, probably even longer than that. This is page 8 of the Week 40 report. Week 41, they added data for the seasonal flu. So it changed name from the Weekly COVID-19 Surveillance Report to the Weekly Flu and COVID-19 Surveillance Report. Otherwise, the report is identical. It is the same data. It is the same text. It is just new visuals. And as we can see, between the week 40 that we're looking at here and week 41, hallelujah, things are finally starting to look better in the UK. Way better. No, they aren't. Because they decided, this is the UK government, decided to change the scales. They have not put this in writing anywhere. It's on the visuals. But just comparing them side by side, suddenly changing the colors, you don't do that. You never do that. And if you need to, because the colors are difficult to show, change the colors to something completely different, or put in a font size enormous stating that we changed the scales. Otherwise, you're lying. And that's, in my view, what this is. It's a lie. So what can we conclude from this? We can conclude that people have a limited attention span. Just show anyone a cat picture and they're going to go, ooh, cats, and basically run off. Always be careful with maps because, as I said, maps show geography. Maps do not necessarily show people. And most of the time, people have the impact. I generally say that tech is easy, people are hard. And that is very applicable here as well. Visuals are extremely powerful. Not everyone is predominantly visual. The majority of the population is. There is always going to be people who are not predominantly visual. But you can do so much with visuals and a well-crafted story. You're going to use the story to nudge the thinking along and the visuals to show people exactly what they want to see. So with that, with great power comes great responsibility. This is a huge responsibility that I find that very few journalists take seriously. There are some amazing data journalists out there, but there's for every great journalist, there's a ton of people who do not think things through. There are most often red flags when something is going on. And if you know where to look, you might actually spot them. As long as nobody's outright lying to you, because if they are, you need to go to the base data to figure out where the lie is. But most of the time, you're going to see red flags. I mean, just go to Fox News and you're going to see a lot of red flags. And my most important point for this whole session, we see what we want to see. Everyone has preconceptions. I always say that if you don't like my preconceptions, I have others that you're not going to like either. And everybody does. Everybody has preconceptions based off their upbringing, their thought patterns. We are never immune to these preconceptions. Something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which I highly recommend you look up because that is what's going on in that case. Data will never tell any other story than the one the narrator makes it tell, either by choice or mistake. My goal today was to show you how easily we can trick ourselves with visuals. When I started building this session out a year ago, I wasn't expecting to find quite as much shenanigans as I did. And at first I found the whole thing absolutely hilarious to see the obvious ways people were trying to bend the data to their will and not really making a good job. Unfortunately, the laughter kind of died in my throat as I came to realize just how many people have been deceived by these obvious tricks. Because it begs the question, what other trickeries are out there? And when you combine these tricks, these fairly cheap tricks, with some serious profiling, then you're into really, really dangerous territory. Remember these guys. Cambridge Analytica is not here anymore. The company folded. But the people behind it and the minds behind it and the concepts behind it, they're there. I highly recommend to you go look at the Social Dilemma at Netflix. It highlights a few of these things. Very, very interesting. So, in closing, be observant, be vigilant, because you will never know who might benefit from convincing you. Do not get burned. My name is Alexander, and I thank you so much